Okay. Yeah, so a couple people have been asking. So Matt and Nicole went into the hospital yesterday evening. And so we're still waiting for baby Julian. No, it's not going to be named Julian. So, but yeah, so you be keeping them in your prayers. Two things. First of all, I did change my shirt because I was wearing the same shirt. I can't help it. It's like I got a 3-day rotation, and it's always seems to be on a Wednesday or a Sunday. So I changed my shirt for you. Secondly, tonight we're going to try something unheard of. We're going to try to get through 3 chapters, and I'm actually going to read them all. I think we can do it. I read through it this afternoon. I had Genesis. I was like, okay, we're going to sit through here. And I timed myself just reading. So I get 20 minutes of reading. It means I got 20 minutes to 3 hours to finish the rest of it. So if you want to open up your Bibles to Esther chapter 5. Man, I am freezing today. Is anybody else freezing? Oh, it's warm in here, but I'm freezing. Like, that's the problem is I started getting cold once I changed my shirt. Right, Esther chapter 5. You know, I read an article a while ago. This is kind of loud, isn't it? Or is that just me? Am I cold and I'm hearing really well? I read an article a little while ago, and it was about this British teenager, and his name was George Garrett, and it said that he changed his name to a 13 name that he called himself, legally changed his name to Captain Fantastic, Faster Than Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Wolverine, Hulk, and the Flash combined, and that is his legal name. And I was just kind of looking at it, and, you know, because they kind of asked him, like, why do you think you deserve this name? And he basically just said, because that's who I am. You know, sometimes I think we're kind of clueless when it comes to reality, and what we're going to go through here this evening really is going to deal with some of that. And I hope you read ahead, again, in looking at this story of Haman and Esther and Mordecai and Xerxes. So we've come to chapter 5. As quick as I can, background is Esther's become queen. Remember, her cousin Mordecai is in the court. He's raised her. He's sitting at the gate. He finds out, because he has some role, that these 2 guys, which will come up here again when we get into chapter 6, these 2 different guys have a conspiracy against him. He tells Esther. Esther tells the king. Everybody still with me? His life is saved. It's recorded, but nothing is ever done with it. He's never rewarded over it. It's completely forgotten. Right after that, we find out that there's this guy named Haman, and he's lifted up. He sort of becomes what we'd call maybe the prime minister of all of Persia. So not just Persia itself, but the whole kingdom of Persia. Number 2, the big cheese. He hates the Jews because he has complete hatred for them. He hates Mordecai, so he comes up with this plan of, I'm going to kill not just Mordecai, but all of the Jews. He puts out a decree that in 11 months he's going to kill every Jew. That is in the whole empire. That's not just in Shushan, where we're going to be here tonight, but that's throughout the whole kingdom. So that's Ezra back in Jerusalem. That's all throughout this kingdom. He's so excited about it that he says, I'm going to pay for it. And remember, it's $154 million plus that he's going to pay in order to get this done. That's how jazzed he is about wiping these people out. That's how much hatred he has. Mordecai gets word of this, sends word to Esther. He says, hey, you need to intercede on behalf of all your people to the king. And, you know, God knows exactly, maybe you were raised up for such a time as this. And remember what Esther says. She starts off and she says, I haven't even seen the king for a month, and you know what will happen if I go see the king. If he doesn't extend that scepter to me, he's going to kill me. He's going to wipe me out. If you're not invited at all, you're dead. And Mordecai says, you're dead anyway, right? You're a Jew. You're dead anyway. Just because you're queen doesn't mean you're going to be safe. And he kind of goes through these threefold. Hey, you're still part of this. He says, you don't know if you're not been raised up for this. And on top of that, God will save our people. So it's either going to be through you or somebody else. Do you want to be involved in that? So again, a huge thing of radical faith here kind of goes back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel. And remember, it's based on who God is, not on what God is going to do. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they told Nebuchadnezzar, God is able to deliver us from this furnace, but even if he doesn't, right? And that was the key. And that's where we sort of ended last week. What we come to here tonight, because word has been spread, she says, okay, you go tell everybody to pray and fast. And again, with that, there's no mention of the word prayer, but it's assuming that they're praying for 3 days. Word spreads fast. And behind the scenes, what is kind of the big thing, and I know I've said this every week, but God is orchestrating, God is moving. So we're going to see some of those acrostics again. Job would say, I look right and he is not there. I look left and I don't have a sense or see him there, but I know he is there and I know that he is present. And that's kind of what we see through Esther's, even when we don't see it. And yet those acrostics hidden throughout the word here, which again, ancient scribes, or rabbi scribes, they would capitalize that. So we knew that it was Yahweh or Jehovah. They were trying to point out, God is in the midst of this if you're looking. And yes, sometimes in the midst of the things that are going on, you and I have to sort of take a step back and say, okay, we know God never leaves or forsakes. So where is he in the midst of this? Because it's not changing the situation at all. And even when we get to chapter 8, which I'm not even brave enough to get that many chapters done, but at least the few of these, we're going to see that God is moving. When things are falling apart, things feel like they're out of control, when everything looks like they're falling apart, and we say things like, God, why are you forsaking me? Why have you left me alone? God, am I on your bad side? Is this just me that goes through this list? What have I done? Is he aware of the things that are going on in my life? Is he still in control? Because in this book, it sort of sets a stage before us. The book of Esther, outside of the Torah, right, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, is considered in Jewish mindset the most important book next to the first 5 books. Again, doesn't mention prayer, doesn't mention God's name, and yet they see it because they see God's hand all throughout it. That's why the Feast of Purim, which will be coming up here when we finish, that's kind of why we're trying to set the schedule, so we can have the Feast of Purim there at the end. It's a wonderful scene, and we kind of march into it this evening. They should make a movie, and I know they made a movie of this, a couple different ones. And I don't want to, back talk any of the movie makers, but they're just not good enough, right? I mean, we're going to go through some stuff here. This is like a rom-com drama. You know what that is? Romantic comedy drama. Like action-packed at the same time. It's so good, right? There's so much here. So we're going to catch up here with Esther. She's about to enter into the king's presence, and it says, chapter 5, verse 1, Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house. So again, they've excavated Shushan, this palace. There is room upon room, and there are long walks into these rooms. So the idea is she's walking, and you can see all the way down from where Xerxes is, right? From where Ahasuerus is. So she walks from room to room to room, and eventually she's making her way towards the king. It says, So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, and that she had found favor in his sight, the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. That was her hope. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. So again, Proverbs, we talked about this a little bit last week. Proverbs tells us the king's heart is in the Lord's hand. The Lord is sort of aiming here. God has given her grace. He puts out the scepter. She touches the top of it. She knows protocol. And I think there's something here, with Esther, again, complete different than Vashti, and I don't want to diminish what Vashti did because I think she stood up and did what was right. But she has the right protocol here, very respectful throughout this. She shows great respect. I'm sure there's something about that Xerxes admires. Because not only is she beautiful on the outside, but on the inside too, there's this gentleness and there's this respect. She knows the right protocol. Remember, she had told Mordecai, hey, I haven't seen the king for 30 days. You don't just walk in there at all. But we were told that he loves her. And so I sort of imagine it like this. Again, if I'm directing this movie, okay, this is the way it is he sees, again, sort of her walking. I think of it like my wife and I when we're at a place. And she gives me that look or that gesture, right? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? If you have a spouse, they give you that look like, we got to go, or hey, this is important, or whatever the look is. She walks in, sort of gives him, and maybe she's like, and he's, what are you? So he puts out the scepter. That's how it plays out in my mind, okay? Scepter is placed out. She touches the top of it. Verse 3 says, and the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? And we sort of get the sense that he knows something serious are on her heart. So he sees her coming. He knows she wants to say something to him. So he says, hey, what's on your mind? What is your request? And it shall be given to you up to half of the kingdom. Now he says up to half the kingdom. Again, it was just sort of a saying. You'll remember Herod in the Gospels with Salome, or with Salome, after she does her dance, he says, hey, anything you want, I'll give you up to half the kingdom. It means, hey, whatever you want, you just tell me what we need. He knows this is serious. He says, hey, you have the freedom here to share with me. Esther answered, if it pleases the king. Now remember, everybody in the court is listening now, right? Because first of all, they're like, she just walked in here. That is not what you're supposed to do. And he said, hey, you can have whatever you want. Everybody is listening. They're all curious to find out. Let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him. So she has some great wisdom here on her part. She doesn't say in front of everybody, hey, this bozo Haman over here is trying to wipe out the people. This jerk over here, this is what he's doing. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. First of all, there's tact. Second of all, remember, Haman is number 2 in the court, right? He's probably got his bros and his buddies all around. She says, this is not the place for it. So she says, yeah, king, if it seems good to you, I would like to have a dinner or a lunch for you and for Haman, and for it to be very private. Now, again, as we go through this, as the story builds, verse 4 has the second acrostic here, again, where it says, let the king and Haman come today. Again, spoken by a Jew. Whenever it's by a Jew, it's forward. Whenever it's spoken by somebody else, a Gentile, it's backwards. So again, you have the letters for Yahweh. And again, as the scribes copied the book of Esther, they would capitalize the YHWH there so that people would know. So it's hidden there in the work at this sort of pinnacle part of the story. God is still working and moving. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther said. So no doubt, this sort of strokes Haman's ego. We're going to find out he's a megalomaniac to the extreme, right? He's going to find out, and he's probably super excited. He's like King Xerxes and Queen Esther invited me. I don't know if that's what he called him. Invite him to lunch, but it's sort of buttering up his ego here. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared, and at the banquet of wine, the king said. So again, typical Persian banquet. It's called the banquet of wine because all good decisions are made drunk, apparently, in the Persian mindset, right? What is your petition? And it shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. Hey, honey, what do you want? Now, I love this story because I see so much of just kind of their relationship here. Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. Now, you will see this is italicized, and you will have a semicolon or a colon. It doesn't say this here. So she says, my request is, and then there's a pause there. So she's thinking, she's sort of pausing. It's sort of like, he says, hey, honey, what do you really want? My petition, that's kind of the idea. She's sort of stalling here for a minute. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to a banquet which I will prepare for them tomorrow, and I will do as the king has said. So she says, okay, here's the thing. Let's do this. Let's have another banquet, right? Another banquet of wine here. You and Haman can come again tomorrow. Now, the question always is, why is she doing this? She invited him. Why is she waiting? I've sat with this for a while, and I wonder if just because in the way that it's sort of written, if she didn't think it was going to happen so fast. She says, hey, king, I would love to invite you to dinner. You and Haman. He says, where's Haman? Let's do it right now. And she was like, oh, okay. I was hoping to make some really good falafels. All I got is, some shawarma here, but we're going to do it. When people come over and you're like, hey, why don't you come over for lunch? And they're like, sure, let's do it right now. Oh, today, yeah. And you're pulling out peanut butter and pickles and everything else that you have, right? Trying to make Triscuit sandwiches and things. So the other part of that, I think, is again, she has great patience here. And throughout this patience, this is what I love, is God's providence is worked throughout this. Because in the second day, she has a check in her spirit. She's not quite ready. She's thinking maybe, hey, I didn't think this was going to happen so fast. She begins to move. She's not prepared. In her hesitation, here's what happens. In her hesitation, Haman goes out and builds gallows, right? Not only that, which will be the place where he's hung. On top of that, that night, the king has divine insomnia. So the king's kept up all night, which he hears then about Mordecai. Haman builds these gallows. So again, you and I might be in a situation where we think, hey, this has got to happen now, right? Not you, everybody else, right? I mean, it's like when you pray for patience. But sometimes, and I've found the majority of the time when we're not so hasty for things, that's when we allow God's providence to be able to work. Because this is going to set the stage for everything that needs to happen. So she hesitates. She says, let's just do this tomorrow, reschedule for tomorrow. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. This is where you tell this guy his ego needs to be stroked all the time, right? He has more money. I mean, he's able to give $154,000 or $1 million to wipe out the Jews. He's number 2 in all Persia. I mean, he has everything that you would need, and yet he's still not satisfied. And again, that's the way the flesh is. Never satisfied, never happy, right? If I just had a new house, a new blouse, a new spouse, whatever it is, right, then I would be happy. That would make my life perfect. He's number 2. He's wealthy beyond imagination. He has everything. Nothing's been withheld from him because one thing, he's overwhelmed and he's angry about it. And notice what he does. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and called for his friends and his wife, Zeresh. So Zeresh means gold. So she was an expensive lady, I guess. So he gathers all the guys and he gathers his wife around. And I love this story. This is the comedy part of it. Then Haman told them of his great riches. So he gathers everybody together like, hey, why are we here? He's like, you guys know how rich I am, right? Wife, you know how rich I am. Not only that, he says the multitude of his children, as if his wife didn't know that one, right? Again, chapter 9 is going to tell us he has 10 sons, which was a sign of masculinity. He says, you guys know I'm wealthy, and you know I'm a man's man. And everything in which the king had promoted him and how he advanced above the officials and the servants of the kings. He says, and you guys know where I am. So he has this sort of Persian brag fest, right? And he has all of his favorite people around to kind of coax him and say, yeah, you're right. You are awesome. Moreover, so there's even more to this. Haman said, besides Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in and the king to the banquet which she had prepared, and tomorrow again invited by her along with the king. So he says, hey, Queen Esther invited moi. Okay? Twice. And this guy over here won't bow down and show me any sort of respect at all. It's interesting because there's an acrostic here that's spoken by Haman here in verse 13. It says, yet all this avails me nothing. So we have the third one here. Again, it's backwards because it's spoken by Haman, but the name of Yahweh, God is moving even in the middle of this huge brag fest here. So long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, man, that guy really gets under my skin. Every time I see him there, I can't be happy at all. Then his wife Zeresh and his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits, so 75 feet-ish, that Mordecai may be hanged. Then go merrily to the king to the banquet, and this thing pleased Haman, so he made the gallows. Honey, I know you, and I know your heart's heavy, so you know what? This is what you should do. make some gallows and you can hang Mordecai, and then you can have a good lunch with the king. And I'm sure he looked at her and he says, honey, this is why I love you, right? Because you speak my language. I mean, she's that one of those sort of people. Now remember, the Persians didn't hang with a rope, they impaled people. So whatever this is more so, sticking out, and we're going to find out here it's in the front yard. And the sense is, what she's telling him is, I know you're upset. I know what would make you better. Let's put a bunch of stakes outside. We'll get Mordecai, and we'll throw him on one. And when you can't sleep, you can open up the curtains and look and see his dead carcass hanging there, and you'll be able to go, and close it up and go to bed, and you'll wake up in the morning and stressed out, get your cup of coffee, look, and there's Mordecai still hanging dead, and then you can go to lunch with the king. I don't see what the problem is, right? So I'll leave my comments to myself. But she must have been some sort of woman. So the plot thickens here. Look, guys, we're perfect. We're totally going to do this. I'm so excited. So the tension sort of built. It says, that night the king could not sleep. So again, this is the night before the meal. God gives him sort of divine insomnia. So the one commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they read before the king. So he has divine insomnia. He can't sleep. And he says, hey, Chronicle guy, history guy, I can relate to this. You can ask my wife. Every night before I go to bed, I watch something on YouTube, like History Channel or something, to kind of dull, because in high school, if I needed a nap, I just waited till history class. He says, I can't sleep. Where's the Chronicle kid? Hey, read me something out of the books. Now remember, they took meticulous records. So they would go by, they would give name and where you were from, what you were wearing, what you did. And he says, I can't sleep, and so I want this. Now you can say this is a coincidence here, but think about this. Think about how God has put this upon the king's heart to not be able to sleep. And the one thing he asked for is the one thing that's going to lead to the rescuing and some ammo here for Esther. Is God knew what was going on. I've been praying lately for insomnia for the leaders of the world. Well, I'm serious, because for somebody doesn't sleep very well myself. I've learned, and I don't always do it, but learned when we wake up at 3:00 to just say, okay, Lord, what do you want? Instead of trying to sleep till 6 still and then not sleep and just stare at the wall or be angry because everybody else in the house is sleeping. So he gets insomnia. It says, and it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigtha and Teresh, remember the rappers? No, I'm just kidding, they're eunuchs. Two of the king's eunuchs and doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So he finds out again. And again, what are the odds that he reads through that section? Now, this is 12 years before this had happened, that this has been recorded. So he kind of goes, I don't know, let's start here. He goes, there was a guy, Bigtha and Teresh. And he goes, yeah, I kind of remember those guys. And he starts reading through this story. Now, one thing about the Persians, which is interesting and will come into play here, is they were rewarded for loyalty like you would not believe. Because kings of Persia were not kind. And they were always worried about loyalty, right? We find out that Xerxes is going to be killed by the head eunuch and his head bodyguard later. And so they would reward loyalty. They made a big deal about it. And the perfect timing, God being on the throne, God being sovereign, God is working, God knows what's going on. And the king said, who is in the court? Right? Basically this is what the king says. Who's on the clock? Right? Who's on the clock right now? Who clocked in early? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king should hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So Mordecai stays up all day and all night to make gallows, and he is super stoked and excited. The king is up, he can't sleep. He says, hey, this Mordecai guy, what have we sort of done for him? Again, he had said nothing had been bestowed upon him at all. He says, well, hey, who's here then in the courts? And Haman walks in because he's so excited to share with the king this revelation he's had of killing these Jews. And it says, and the king's servant said to him, Haman is there standing in the court, and the king said, let him come in. Hey, Haman's here. And the king said, great, that's awesome. Bring him in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what shall be done to a man of whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, again, this is where he's megalomaniac here, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? So he hears the king's tired. He's like, man, I've been up all night. What should I do for somebody that I want to honor? And here's pride at work. He goes, man, who's as good as me? Obviously, this has to deal with me. He's like, this is the best day ever. I'm going to hang Mordecai, have lunch with the king, and he's going to honor me. And Haman answered the king, and I assume he got his deep voice, puffed out his chest. For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which was a royal crest that would be placed on his head. So again, in Persian ranking, you were recognized by the robe that you wore. The king's robe was distinguishable above all other robes. So this is what you should do, king. You get one of your robes that you've worn that everybody knows is one of yours, and you give it to this guy. Then you put him on one of your horses, and not just any horse. You put him on the fanciest horse that you have, right? And again, here is what's interesting about this is, he says, I want to be dazzled, right? I'm thinking this is me. Haman says, this is me here. I want to be dazzled. I'm thinking, I thought about this, like if the President of the United States asked me, you could have anything you want. I'm thinking I don't ever want to pay taxes again. I want my kids to be able to go to school for free. I want a taco fund, whatever the case is. But he says, no, I want a big show. I want the lights. I want the fog machines and the lasers out. Old Testament laser fogs and machines, right? That's what's going on here. Verse 9 says, let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on a horseback through the city square so that everybody can see him, right? Not through the courts. And proclaim before him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. He wants the greatest amount of exposure possible. He says, not after all of that, when he's got your robe and he's got your fancy horse, he should have a parade, whoever this guy is. And you should have somebody declaring what he did all the way through town so that everybody can see what he's done. Again, the flesh loves to be seen by men. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested. I'm sure Haman's palms are sweating now, like his heart is beating, right? He's got this grin on his face for a little bit. He's sort of posed, ready for his painting or whatever it is. Hurry and take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai, the Jew who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone that you have spoken. And I'm sure he's like, oh, yeah, no, that's what I thought was going to. Again, do you see how this could be a rom-com drama? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like it could be such a good movie. Sam's not in here. Sam's into movies. Remind me to talk to Sam. This would be a good movie. Verse 11, so Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led the horseback through the city square, proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor, right? That's how I read it, at least, right? He puts him on a horse, he leads him, and I'm sure there's not a whole lot of excitement in his voice. And can you imagine, again, what the people are thinking? Because nobody knows what's going on, right? This is 12 years later. So all of a sudden, Mordecai comes, puts on this robe, and I'm sure Mordecai's like, hey, what's going on? Just get on the horse, would you? Leads him through there. Hey, these are the people loyal to the king. This is what happens. And people are going, what is going on? They're not quite sure. And I love the picture again. It's kind of like, I always think of it back. Like, you remember homecoming in high school? I remember one year in homecoming, we just got creamed. And I remember we were losing. I lost count. I can't even remember. But I remember the announcer, like every time we would score, it'd be like, Golden Valley scores another. And then it was, and Tioga scores again and again. And even the announcer was tired of saying that we were losing so much, right? And that's kind of the idea here. He's like, hey, look, he's here. We're told in Isaiah, no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that will rise up against you in judgment, he will condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is so in me, says the Lord. So if you are his and you're his servant, know this. Again, know this truth here, that God is working for you, because Satan is going to want to toy with your emotions and your thoughts, saying, hey, these things aren't real. Afterward, Mordecai went out to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house. Sorry, it's funny to me. Haman hurried to his house, mourning with his head covered. So Mordecai goes back to work, and everybody's like, what was that about? He goes, I don't know. That was weird. And Haman's like, I just need to go home. I've got a migraine. He goes home to pout. And when Haman told his wife Zeresh and all of his friends, because everybody's waiting, how was it? Not what I thought was going to happen. Everything that had happened to him, the wise men and his wife said to him, look how easy they turn on him. If Mordecai, whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. Thanks, honey. Right? Thanks for that word. Again, they're superstitious. Persians were very superstitious. They're saying, hey, if this is the way it's rolling right now, this is not good for you. Like, she's not including herself here, right, at all. She's like, this is not good for you. She changes her tune completely. And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came, hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So I'm sure he has no appetite now, no sleep, because he's been up all night probably making these gallows for everybody. Chapter 7, verse 1, it says, so the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, so the time period here is killing him. What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Up to half of the kingdom, it shall be done. He goes, the anticipation is killing me. What do you want? You've got 2 meals here. What do you want? Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. So she's probably boldened a little bit she's probably heard about what's going on. People are probably saying, man, your cousin was just like on the king's horse in his robe going through downtown, and Haman was like, this guy's awesome. He didn't look super thrilled. So she's probably emboldened a little bit here. Maybe she's prayed through it. Whatever the case is, she gives this request. For we have been sold. Now, what does she mean by that? Remember what Haman had said? Hey, I'll pay for this, right? $541 million. I will pay for this. I'll get it done. My people and I to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. King, in case you don't know what I mean, to be destroyed, king, to be killed and annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue. Interesting. Although the enemy could not compensate for the king's loss. So she says, hey, there's this decree, and I'm asking for my life and the life of my people because we've been sold. And if it was just a command that we were slaves, I would deal with that. But you, Xerxes, when she says the enemy could not compensate the king's loss, she says you're going to suffer a great loss, and there's nothing the enemy here can do to be able to make up for that loss. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther. So I assume now he realizes what's going on, right? He's not a dummy here. And if you ever had one of those conversations where all of a sudden things are starting to put back in your mind, we see sort of a change in his tune here. He answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? And who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? Now, I'm sure that Haman is doing one of these right underneath the table. Like, oh my goodness, this is the worst day ever. What's interesting is, this last part of verse 5 has another acrostic here, but it's the I am. Again, another I am. And it says, verse 6, and Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. Again, the encryption here, the numeric value of The adversary, the enemy, is a wicked Haman. The numeric value is 666. You take that for what you will. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. That's the duh moment, right? He's like, hey, who would do this? Where is he right now? Tell me. And she says, the wicked person, right? She's not just like, the person who was kind of doing it. She goes, no, this wicked guy is Haman, this dude right here. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. So he leaves, not just because he's angry, but also because now he knows there's a dilemma here, right? Because he realized that the wife whom he loves, even if she is able to survive, she's never going to forgive him for what's going on here, because all of her people are going to be wiped out. He realized that he had given Haman this ring in order to make this decree. Remember, they were drunk, and all of a sudden he's trying to remember, oh man, I do kind of remember talking about that. Sounds like a good idea. Let's wipe them all out. And it says, but Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that the evil determined against him by the king. Again, here's an acrostic here. That evil that was determined against him, again, spoken by the writer, whoever wrote Esther says it. So the fourth acrostic here of Yahweh. And it's sort of irony here, right? Because now he's begging her. So he's blubbering. He's like, this is the worst day ever. And he's pleading with her. And it says, when the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. So they had banqueting couches or banqueting chairs, and the king is furious. Haman is begging to Esther, right? The king returns, and Haman is lying across the couch where Esther was. Notice what he says here. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? The word there for assault is molest. So he comes back, he's upset. And here's Haman, like drenched over where Esther is, and she's probably pulled back on the couch, and he goes, really? Now you're going to molest my wife right in front of me? So he's pretty ticked now at this moment. As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. It kind of was the Persian way of saying, this is your last day, the lights are going to go out, right? They're like, we're just going to cover your face now. This is not, nobody wants to make eye contact with you. It's kind of like, I always think of it like the Westerns, when you think of Westerns and the guy who makes coffins comes out and makes some measurements right before that's kind of what happens, right? They put a bag over his head and they're like, this is not looking good for you, dude. Now, Harbona, which means donkey driver, literally, one of the eunuchs said to the king, look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. He says, hey, there's gallows in Haman's front yard. He just made these things last night. Then the king said, hang him on it. So the king is upset, right? Not only has Haman sort of done this, but the king feels tricked. The king comes back. He sees Haman laying over Esther. Again, Persian law was anybody who touched the queen was put to death. Assyrian law was anybody that came within 7 steps of the queen or royalty without being asked was put to death. It's a tense moment here. He covers his face. Harbona says, whose name again is donkey driver, and he's one of the main eunuchs here. He says, hey, I got a great idea. We're covering his face. Nobody likes him anyway. He's made these gallows in his front yard. Why don't we use that? And the king says, that sounds like a perfect idea to me. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. So again, an interesting picture. Man, we could have done chapter 8. No, we're not. No, yeah, we won't do it. Again, interesting picture. The book of Esther, again, is reverenced by the Jews outside of the Torah. So the first 5 books of the law, right, which are considered to be the highest of all books in Judaism is the book of Esther. It has been that way for centuries. No matter the issue or the trial, they always, I mean, even during the Holocaust, one of the books that the Jews read the most was, you want to take a guess? The book of Esther. And it always, we said it at the very beginning, the Israel and the Jews have been to every funeral of anybody that's ever tried to wipe them out. And God protects his kids. During Purim, they celebrate that story. Again, every group that's tried to exterminate the Jews has seen their ruins. I remember moving there, and I wanted to do all the touring when I was 18 when I moved there, and I wanted to see everything. And I did one of those tours where they take you around, and you see Greek and Roman and Assyrian things, all ruins done by a Jewish guy telling you about how they tried to wipe out his people. An important lesson, again, the distance from the banqueting table to the gallows is really short for the wicked. And that's something that we should always remember when it comes to, where is our hope and where is our life. You and the Lord are always a majority. And God is going to continue to do a great work here. He's going to continue to build. This is a story that has been building forever and ever, and God is going to be doing a great work. Man, I'm excited. Next week, we'll try to get through maybe the rest of Esther. So be reading chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, and then next week we'll take a running start at them. Amen? All right, let's pray. Lord, we just thank you again for your word. Thank you so much for just allowing us to be able to take a moment and to be able to see and read and be able to stop for a minute and see that you're working, Lord. And I know there's times where even in my own life I've said, where are you? What have I done? And I allow those thoughts and those worries and those anxieties and those stresses to sort of overwhelm, Lord, and not realizing that there's providence that you have in our life, Lord. You have things that are foreordained for us to walk in, Lord, good works. Lord, and as your workmanship, Lord, as your poema, as an expression of who you are, you want to do wonderful things, Lord. And so I ask for, as scary as it is, Lord, for patience in the times where we feel overwhelmed and overcome or we don't see or hear you, that you remind us, Lord, just as you've reminded your people for generation upon generation, that just because we don't see or hear or perceive, it doesn't mean you're not working. And I thank you for your hand of sovereignty, Lord. Lord, and in those times where maybe things have been delayed, Lord, that you're preparing the gallows for our enemies. Lord, for those times that things are sort of put to a halt or there's a waiting time period, that you've put something heavy upon those that are over us, Lord, in leadership. And I thank you just again for allowing us to be able to come to you, Lord, in the same way that Esther was. And even more so, Lord, because of what your son has done, that we can not just call you God and master and creator, but we can call you Father. So I thank you again for that, Lord. Thank you just again for caring for us. Thank you again for moving and working. And we just ask you to be blessed in our lives. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen. God is good. Amen.